Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We continue celebrating 25th anniversary of the British Council in Uzbekistan and are working closely with our partners to discuss and explore important issues in education reform. And our policy discussion today is focusing on sustainable development in creative education. And we're going to discuss how higher education sector responds to global challenges. This program is part of Creative Spark regional project that aims to drive creative enterprise, support skills development, and contributes to development of creative economies. And this program in Uzbekistan responds to large-scale national reforms in Uzbekistan and is developed and being delivered in close partnership with the Ministry of Higher and Secondary Specialized Education, El Yurtumide Foundation, many partners like universities, enterprise partners, with big support from British Embassy in Tashkent and Uzbek Embassy in London. Today, we brought together for our policy discussion the Ministry of Higher and Secondary Specialized Education, El Yurtumide Foundation, Oli Majlis of the Republic of Uzbekistan, Vice Chancellors, Pro-Vice Chancellors and academic leaders from universities in the UK and Uzbekistan. And we also brought together wider Creative Spark network, wider network of projects involved in education reform in Uzbekistan. And as I said in the beginning, today we're going to look at why higher education sector needs to mainstream sustainable development. What are key elements, what are key parts in green strategies that universities worldwide are developing, and how sustainability is embedded in academic work, in standards, in curriculum, in teaching practices and assessment, and how higher education institutions work with employers, and what it is that all stakeholders need to do in order to build effective and efficient ecosystems. And I really hope that by the end of our discussion today, we will come up with immediate action points, which will be an essential part of the British Council program in Uzbekistan. As I said, we run this program in close collaboration and partnership with the Ministry of Higher and Secondary Specialized Education. And I'm pleased to give a floor to say a few words to open the event. First Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Komiljon Karimov. Over to you, Komiljon Hamidovich.
Thank you very much, Jamila. Assalamu alaikum, hurmatli tadbir ishtirokchilari, Your Excellencies, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are today. So I'm absolutely delighted to be, not just to be part of this event, but also as my colleagues from British Council asked me to moderate this session today. And in the beginning, I will have plenty of time to talk to you, dear colleagues, but I just want to start with words of thanks. I would like to thank my colleagues from British Council and all other organizations who joined us today to organize this webinar, and all the participants who joined us despite their very tight schedules. So thank you very much for organizing. I think we're talking today about very important issue. We will be talking today about sustainable development. And unfortunately, our generations, the previous generations, we lived our life in expense of our future generations. And as such, I think today is very important time when we need to talk about how we can make our future, not just future, our today's today actually more sustainable. And of course, the education sector plays very important role in embedding this the concept of sustainable development into the minds of our new generation. And of course, it's as you know, just like peace and war starts in the minds of people, same, sustainable development also, I think, should start with changing of our minds. Because we tend to, when we talk about sustainable development, we tend to think only about environment, about the climate change, but as such, this concept is much wider. It's actually a very holistic concept, which includes very different aspects of our daily life. And I would refer to Sustainable Development Goals of UN, which includes 17 very important the goals, which includes the poverty issues, hunger, health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, clean water, the energy issues, decent work, inequality, sustainable cities, and many others. And as from this list, we can see that it covers almost all aspects of our the daily life. So as such, as we're talking about holistic concept, we should be also to try to include these important matters into our education system. And when we speak about sustainable development and education, it's not only about changing our curriculum. No, it's actually, we can see that around the world, universities now, they make environmental sustainability one of the core values. And they aim to be climate compatible and to align to these UN Sustainable Development Goals. Of course, in Uzbekistan as well, we consider this issue as a very important part of what we're doing. I would say that we are at some sort of a beginning stage of internalizing this problem, the problem and concept of sustainable development into our education system. And of course, we will be hearing today from experts, from parliamentarians, different stakeholders, how this is being done in Uzbekistan and in UK and in other countries. So with this, if you allow me, I would like to stop here. I wish once again to thank all our partners and colleagues who joined us today for this event, and I'm looking forward for a very focused and productive webinar. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kamiljon Hamidovich. It's a pleasure working with the Ministry of Higher and Secondary Specialized Education, and for us to support large-scale reforms that are taking place in Uzbekistan. And as I said earlier, one of the core objectives of our program to develop sustainable partnerships between UK and Uzbekistan, I would like to ask Her Majesty's Ambassador Tim Torla to say a few words about the importance of this discussion and to give us a wider global context to it. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Jamilia. Assalamu alaikum. And thank you to the British Council for the invitation to open this vitally important event. It's great to see so many participants, including a lot of old friends. Creative Spark has a tremendous reputation here and a great following, and it's a wonderful program. Thank you particularly to Kamiljon Karimov, the First Deputy Minister of Higher Education, and to Adham Bekmuradov from Elyort Umide, and of course to the British Council. As Kamiljon pointed out, when United Nations member states unanimously agreed the 17 Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, they set out an extraordinarily comprehensive agenda to end poverty and deprivation. Countries all over the world, developing, somewhere in between, agreed to work in partnership to improve health and education, to reduce inequality, to spur economic growth, all at the same time as tackling climate change and working to preserve our oceans and our forests, our nature. So, as Comjon has said, this webinar covers a broad and very ambitious agenda, and it will be a challenge to ensure that sustainable development in all its facets is reflected and advanced in creative education. And I want to focus on one vital part of that sustainable development agenda, which is climate change. And the reason for that is, I suppose, an obvious one. The United Kingdom will, in just over 2 weeks' time, host the 26th Conference of the Parties of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. 5 years on from the genuinely transformational Paris Agreement, some 30,000 people, including probably somewhere close to 140 heads of state and government, that's 3/4 of the world's heads of state or government, will be descending on Glasgow, along with scientists, parliamentarians, civil society activists, academics, business people, educators, the media, young people, old people, some in-between people, will descend on Glasgow. It's a vast undertaking. It's the biggest event of its kind that we've ever organised in the UK, and it's dominated our work here and dominated our work all around the world. And it's a really tough challenge. To meet the goals that were set out in the Paris Agreement 5-6 years ago, we have to decarbonise the global economy between 3 and 5 times faster over the coming decade, as we've done over the last 20 years, and achieve a similar step change in building the resilience of nations and peoples all over the world to the effects of climate change. To do this, we need stronger national action and stronger international collaboration, focused on genuinely practical challenges that we all share. And the education sector has a vital role to play in addressing this global issue, especially by empowering young people in discussion and in solutions. And this policy discussion, which we're about to embark on, is a really good opportunity to start to unpack some of those major challenges that higher education institutions, both in the UK and Uzbekistan, face in addressing these global challenges. We need to share good practice in mainstreaming sustainability in higher education, and, as Jamelia said, to agree some concrete next steps. The education sector and the creative industries specifically are very much part of the solutions to the challenges that we face. The way we use materials, the way we use energy and resources, the means of production, transport, distribution, the innovation and creativity that are at the heart of your work. And most especially, I think, the skills that you have in connecting people and communicating ideas in imaginative and influential, trenchant ways. All of these need to be harnessed. It's an area, inevitably, that this year, but beyond COP, the UK is working really actively on. In Uzbekistan, the British Embassy's funding work to strengthen Uzbek policy making. and government coordination on climate action. We're helping to develop and implement the green economy strategy. And we're working actively with young people to build a platform of awareness and influence and to press for change. The British Council has played a really important part also by strengthening cooperation between the UK and the world and between sectors and communities. The British Council's Climate Connection is supporting COP26 objectives by laying the ground for future collaboration and partnerships on climate change. So a really important event at a really important time. I wish you productive discussions and look forward very much to hearing the conclusions and indeed to be continuing to work with you all in this such vitally important area. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Tim. Really important messages and things that we really need to focus on, including sharing good practice, agreeing concrete steps, but also think how we are going to communicate these ideas and how we are going to raise awareness in the country and work with all the stakeholders. Now, I would like Director of El-Yurt Umide Foundation, Adham Sharipovich Bekmuradov, to say a few words, because they have been our partner on Creative Spark program from the outset. Over to you, Adham Sharipovich.
Большое спасибо. Прежде всего, здравствуйте, участники вебинара. Я думаю, сегодняшний вебинар – это очень полезная площадка для обмена мнениями по очень важной теме сегодняшней, которая интересует не только Узбекистан, но и всю мировую общественность. Я не хотел бы сейчас углубляться в детали устойчивого развития, а хотел бы отметить некоторые вещи, которые, я думаю, заинтересуют Британский совет и наших партнеров из Великобритании. Но прежде всего это наши стипендиальные программы, где мы в последнее время тоже уделяем большое значение вопросам подготовки кадров в сферах устойчивого развития экономики. Особенно энергетика для нас, вообще для Республики Узбекистан, представляет очень важную ценность, поэтому мы стремимся отправлять нашу молодежь прежде всего по инновационным сферам энергетики, особенно возобновляемой энергетики. Я думаю, меня слышно, да?
Да.
Слышно. Да, слышно.
Да, слышно.
Слышно, у вас появляется какой-то значок, связанный с...
Я сам удивляюсь,
Да.
выключаю. Слышно меня, да?
Да.
Да, вот я хотел бы отметить, что вдогонку после...
Уходит звук, да.
Кто-то меня выключает, я вас очень прошу, я не буду много говорить. В этом году мы объявили 3 стипендии, и очень интересно, что в них участвовали около 7 тысяч наших молодых конкурсантов, которые почти 400 человек выиграли наши стипендии. Хочу с радостью отметить, что 95% наших стипендиантов выбирают английский язык в качестве иностранного языка. Мы в этом году в Великобритании будем отправлять более 100 молодых ребят на учебу в бакалавриат, в магистратуру и в докторантуру. И я хотел бы еще раз повториться, в этой сфере отрадно, что наши молодые ребята, стипендианты, они выбирают энергетику, машиностроение, то есть технические отрасли в качестве приоритетных отраслей. Я думаю, что правительство Узбекистана, приняв на себя обязанности, задачи по обеспечению устойчивого развития, сделала очень правильный выбор, и мы со своей стороны сделаем все максимально возможное, чтобы подготовить кадры, в том числе в британских университетах, по направлениям устойчивого развития, особенно в сфере энергетики. Поэтому я бы хотел отметить, что наш фонд, и в том числе и Академия госуправления, которая участвует в рамках Creative Spark, мы будем обратить на это внимание, потому что это представляет большую ценность, большое значение для нашей страны. Отрадно, что вот молодежь тоже выбирает такие направления, как креативная экономика, возобновляемая энергетика. Это, конечно, отрадно, что в этом плане наш фонд тоже прилагает максимальные усилия для подготовки таких кадров в зарубежных, престижных зарубежных университетах. Вот в рамках креативной экономики я хотел бы сказать вот один интересный факт. Я буквально на днях был в Кашкадаринской области, и в Шахрисабзе я встретился с одной женщиной, и во время беседы я у нее спросил, а чем вы занимаетесь? Она с интересом мне сказала, что она занимается превращением хобби в бизнес. Она занимается именно в креативной индустрии в Шахрисабзе. Я сказал, а какая самая главная задача, какая главная трудность для вас? Она говорит, главное направление, куда мы стремимся, это развивать образование, вкладывать в образование. Потому что одно дело, мы вышиваем интересные все эти местные всякие вещи для туристов. Другое дело, что мы сможем вот свой бизнес как бы методом конвейера организовать экспорт наших товаров за рубежом. То есть я там увидел потребность наших местных производителей, которые, вот как я сказал, свой хобби превращают в бизнес, они нуждаются в профессиональном образовании, чтобы мы им помогли каким образом выйти на зарубежные рынки, где они могут продавать продукты своего креативного бизнеса. Поэтому я думаю, что вы, выбирав вот такое направление, то есть оказание, скажем, помощи нашим, скажем, предприятиям или организациям в плане устойчивого развития, особенно в сфере развития, в сфере креативного образования, я думаю, Британский совет выбрал очень интересные направления. Ну и в конце хотел бы вас поздравить с вашим 25-летием и отметить, что Британский совет – это один из тех организаций, которые максимально вкладывают в развитие образования в нашей стране. И наряду с многими образовательными учреждениями фонд Ильюрт Умиде тоже имеет очень как бы важный выигрыш от нашего сотрудничества с Британским советом. И я заверяю вас, что мы и впредь будем очень тесно с вами работать. Большое спасибо за внимание.
Спасибо большое, Адхам Шарипович, за ваши теплые слова, за поздравления и за тоже новые идеи для обсуждения, и то, что вы сказали, что есть большой интерес к устойчивому развитию, есть большой интерес среди ваших стипендиантов учиться в Великобритании. И у нас сегодня представлено 8 вузов, которые специализируются в креативном образовании, и устойчивое развитие как раз является основным таким интегральным компонентом этих программ, поэтому будет очень интересно для вас тоже послушать, что сегодня делается в вузах Великобритании. Спасибо вам большое. Ну, а теперь мы перейдем к нашей основной части. И я очень рада опять передать слово первому заместителю министра высшего и среднеспециального образования Камильджону Хамидовичу Каримову, с тем, чтобы он нас провел по вот этой большой тематике, и чтобы эта дискуссия подвела нас к конкретным шагам, которые мы должны предпринять вместе со всеми партнерами. Передаю вам слово, Камильджон.
Спасибо, Jamila. And I wish once again to thank our the guests for their welcomes. And I would like now to move on to our the discussion. And we have number of distinguished experts in this field, as Jamila said, from number of UK universities, but we also have our colleagues from Uzbek universities, and we also have, I'm especially delighted to welcome Диларам Хуснуддиновну Файзиеву. Значит, Диларам Хуснуддиновна является председателем комитета Нижней палаты нашего парламента Али Маджлиса. And if you allow me, colleagues, I would like to go through very briefly around our objectives of this webinar, what we actually aim to achieve today. And we have discussed this with British Council, and we set a number of important the aims for us. And one is to share and explain why to mainstream sustainable development in higher education. And I hope we can focus on this today. We'll also discuss key objectives of zero carbon print strategies and how they're achieved in universities in UK and probably in Uzbekistan. I will also try to unpack sustainable development aspects in national standards. But when we say standards, of course, we mean educational standards here. And we also, I think it's a good opportunity for us to share good practice of employee engagement for sustainable development. We will, taking into account that we have a range of stakeholders today with us, we will discuss how all stakeholders can work together and build efficient ecosystems. And at the end, I hope we will arrive at a few key next steps how we can mainstream sustainable development in creative entrepreneurial education. So this is our aims, and I believe we will achieve those. And with this, we have also worked out few questions to our distinguished panel members. And I would like to start with the first question, which we have prepared for our two panelists today, to Fraser Bart from Goldsmiths from the University of London, and Chris Lane from London Met. And the question for our colleagues is, what are the key drivers for mainstreaming sustainable development in creative entrepreneurial education, and why this is so important for universities today? And I would like to start with Professor Fraser Bart. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm actually not a professor. I'm a non-academic member of Goldsmiths, so I have a slightly different perspective. But thank you very much for having me here today. It's really nice to speak to you all. So probably a quick introduction of who I am. As I said, I'm not an academic member of staff. I work in essentially the Vice Chancellor's office at Goldsmiths as a senior executive officer, so providing policy advice and sort of strategic advice to the senior management team. And one of my key projects is our Green New Deal at Goldsmiths, which seeks to decarbonise the university and transform the curriculum and reorientate our research where possible towards climate-based research, which is obviously an interesting challenge at a university such as Goldsmiths, because we're not typically a STEM university, so we work mainly across creative practices. So I think Chris will be much better placed on this question than I will. So I will just say one thing and pass over to you, Chris, because I think I will be much better placed to talk about the university strategy level shortly. No pressure, of course, Chris. I just wanted to pick up on one thing that the First Deputy Minister said about the sort of generational element of climate change and young people's role. And of course, when we're talking about education, we are often talking about educating sort of late teenagers, people in their 20s as well, of course, as adult education. And the research we've done at Goldsmiths and all future students shows that 67% of our students desire to learn about the climate issues and sustainability within their curriculum. So that's been a real driver for us to focus on our curriculum, but also to see our students as an asset in change and mainstreaming sustainability and climate within our education. So I'll just give one quick example, then pass over to Chris. So at the moment, we're running a project with a multidisciplinary team of our existing students, which is extracurricular for themselves. And it's looking at across our different sort of more creative disciplines, how the materials they use, for example, can be more sustainably sourced and more sustainably reused within the community. And the reason I bring that up is because I think it's a good example of how students are assets within this, not just that the students want this within their higher education, but they're also assets within delivering it and within mainstreaming it. And Chris, I'll pass over to you for your much more scholarly answer than mine, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. Well, yes, to introduce myself, so I'm Chris Lane and I work at London Metropolitan University. And I think, when thinking about this question about what the drivers are for mainstreaming issues around sustainability into our curriculum, I think that our situation in London is one of the things that is maybe primary in my mind and in the university's mind. I think London is like a microcosm of the world. It has incredible disparities of wealth and poverty. And when we think about the Sustainable Development Goals, really, I think what those recognize is that in order to be sustainable, everybody has to be included. And in particular, we need to turn our attention to the people who have the least power in society. So I think that it's partly that responsibility which comes into focus every day when you walk around in the city. And I was just thinking about the comment about young people as well. I think we see that we have a real responsibility and duty, don't we, to the next generation. And actually, rarely a day goes by when I'm not personally challenged by young people to ask me, what am I doing in my position of power as somebody with responsibility within a university to make sure that things are better in the future and that my children don't inherit a world which actually gives them less opportunity than I had. So I think that there are those kinds of driving moral forces that I'm very conscious of. And I think what we've done as a university, and it's very like what's happened at Goldsmiths, is to adopt policies and strategies for particularly putting questions of sustainability and equity into the foreground. So we have a new framework for education that is driven by the needs for creating social justice. So, to really recognize that it is social structures that often limit people's opportunity and put people in very difficult positions. I think we know, don't we, that when we see the very significant changes that we're likely to see as a result of climate change, it will be the people with the highest level of deprivation, the greatest levels of poverty, who will be the first to be affected. The people who may be affected, for example, by issues around water or pollution. It's often the people who are living in the locations with the greatest levels of deprivation that are most affected. So I think that this idea of a transformation of the university curriculum that puts social justice at the heart of what we're trying to do. It's already been mentioned how significant the links to creative industries are as well. And I think one of the really important things about the creative industries is that typically they have a lower bar to entry for people who are from marginalized communities. So, actually very often it's possible to develop your own business because the costs of starting up a new business are lower for people within the creative industries. So I think that's one reason why we have a particular interest in those industries. I think we're interested, aren't we, in creating green jobs in the future, and we know that giving our students an understanding that actually one of the routes that they can take to doing that is to take control and power themselves to be making their own businesses and running their own businesses is one way that they can make a very important impact. And I think one of the things that does maybe is prevents us from or moves us away from the possibility that we might do something that we might term as green washing, you know, the idea that we wear the clothes of environmental change and we talk about it a lot, and we present jobs that appear to have an environmental impact but are actually not making a really evidence-based impact, which is the one that we need to create true change. I think that one of the things, of course, that we're doing, and this echoes the comments about Goldsmiths earlier, is to really look at the way that we're teaching and the subjects that we're teaching and the way that green technology and research around green technology is being put into the heart of the curriculum. I think that's tremendously important, and we're working hard to make those transformations, to change our research priorities and in turn to change the way that we're teaching students. I think one of the sustainable development goals is around partnership, and I think actually one of the real drivers for us has been our relationship with the British Council and the way in which, you know, they've challenged us to think about how we could internationalize our work, and through programs like Creative Spark. And, you know, one of the things that we've done there is really to place environmental issues right at the heart of the programs that we've run. You know, I think ultimately what we've seen and been inspired by is the way that the young people that we work with in universities are absolutely insisting that they want to do interesting and innovative things around climate change. And I think that's the thing that really, above everything else, drives us. I think I can leave it there. I'm happy to come in later with more, but I hope that provides some insight from our perspective.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Mr. Lane and Mr. Bird. I think you have touched on very important matters, you know, about the importance of engaging the research. You know, I think Mr. Bird and yourself, Mr. Lane, have mentioned about this. You have also touched on moral imperative, you know, when we speak about the sustainable development and the climate change, inclusion, responsibility. And I think most of these things also very much linked to a change in our values, you know, especially the values among our young generation, because we really need to instill this value of environment, you know, and sustainable development into the minds of our the young people, not only young, but I think especially young people. So thank you for your ideas. And with this, I would like to move on, if you allow me. And we have the next question, and I would phrase it, you know, so how sustainability is integrated into teaching and learning and university curriculum, how this is reflected in education standards and frameworks. With this, I would invite our colleagues to speak a little bit about, you know, integrating the issue of sustainability into our curriculum. So for this, I would invite Professor John Wheaton from University of Central Lancashire to share his views on this. Please, Professor Wheaton.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be part of this policy dialogue. It's a great honour, and thank you to all the speakers who are here today, including Chris. Thank you for touching on some of the things I was going to touch on. But it is a very important topic, especially given the COP26 that will be taking place in the UK, in Glasgow, in just a few weeks' time. I think I've got a few points to make on how to embed in the curriculum and in research in universities. And one challenge I always find about this topic is that it is such a big topic and that it's systemic. So there's no one issue. All issues are interacting. All issues impact on other issues. And Chris brought that out nicely in what he's just said. So I think the first thing I would say is that it's so important to influence the leadership at the university and within external organizations, because sometimes you need those external organizations to influence your leadership in a university. And that's what we did at UCLan. So I'm a professor of engineering and social science at UCLan. I have a background in science, engineering, but my research is social science. So I cut across a lot of these issues. And I also run a centre for sustainable transitions with about 30 research staff and an institute looking at citizenship, society and social justice. And that is about 60 academic research staff. And you have to lever those resources to influence your leadership, because some of these issues are really difficult. And as Chris said, students ask very sticky and awkward questions. Are your shoes leather? Is your jacket sustainably made? You get all these questions when you stood in front of students. So your leadership needs to make it easier for you within an organization to actually influence and change what's going on in that organization. So we have a climate change emergency, and we asked the university as professors to declare a climate emergency, and that's what they did. And now we're working on them to try and actually implement those changes to decarbonize facilities, to talk to our stakeholders, our suppliers, to use local suppliers rather than international suppliers, for example, particularly with food and catering. If students see that it's happening at the institutional level, they will have the confidence to act at the local level. So that's really, really important, the climate leadership. You need to embed that within the organization. You also need to agree teaching strategies across the organization. So some issues with sustainability are broad and general. They apply to everybody. We have a very wide range of disciplines at UCLan. We have a medical school, engineering school, we have a creative industries, we have nursing, we have all sorts. Now, some of the sustainability issues are applicable to all those, but actually some of them are quite specialized, particularly in a medical setting or an engineering setting. And the conversations need to be subtly different depending on who you're talking to within those settings. What applies to them, what interests them. You have to get the buy-in of the academic staff. And that's really important. So I would always say as well that having those staff work together, so common themes. Chris mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals there. A lot of these goals interact. They're systemic. Teaching and academic staff need to work together. How do we have conversations in ways that will have mass appeal, but also specialist appeal? The research, not just the teaching, but also the research. What underpins a lot of our teaching? And I think this is a really interesting area because as academics, we like to cut ourselves off a little bit. We like to focus on our own research. The institute and centre that I run is transdisciplinary. We bring people together to talk about research and how it applies across disciplines and how we can generate new knowledge, co-production based on those disciplines and those different types of knowledge. I think there's huge benefits. It seems a lot of hard work for institutions to do all this, but there's huge benefits to the institutions. Every institution is based within a community. Chris talked about the inequality and social justice issues. Our university at UCLan, we have about 30,000 students. We're based in the north of the UK, between Liverpool and Manchester. We have some very deprived communities right on our doorstep. Our mission is to get people into university who might not usually have come to university because of lack of confidence, poverty. And it's very, very challenging for students sometimes to make it to the door of the university because of those issues. So we spend a lot of time with students, again, building confidence. You know, we have this impression, don't we? We see Greta Thunberg on TV and we think, oh, young people are happy to protest, are happy to make the voices heard. Not at all. If you come from these communities, you are not used to speaking your mind, particularly in front of audiences. So we have to spend time with our young people, building up confidence and showing them what's possible. And that's sometimes quite difficult when there's a real fear of academic staff, perhaps professors, but we can do that. We can work with young people and help them build up confidence. So in our research, we need to work with our communities. We need to do practical, impactful research. It needs to be useful to our communities. And we've got some projects at the moment that work with the NHS in health settings, understanding the well-being aspects of sustainability, so the social sustainability, and that's my research area. But we also work with communities. We train community researchers, for example, to do their own sustainability research. We train students to go out into the community to work with partners such as housing associations, such as climate action groups. All these people need to contribute to the climate emergency and sustainability research. So when you're standing in front of your students and you can say, we're working in the city of Preston, we're helping to bring local food to the canteen on your campus, they can see the really practical implications of the things that we're talking about. And that generates a lot of interest. So to engage with students and communities and local businesses on a range of issues is incredibly important for the institution. So I'll stop there because I've been talking a lot. And if there's any questions, I'm sure Jamilia will manage that appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Wheaton, and for sharing your ideas. And I understand we also have Mr. Mark Robertson from Queen Margaret Business School in Edinburgh, who also would like to join this the conversation. Please, Mr. Robertson, over to you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to talk about something slightly different to the other speakers, because I wanted to look at the role of government, perhaps, and government agencies in how they can shape curriculum across an entire nation. And to me, it's important that the curriculum is equitable across the nation, and therefore the role that government plays in that, I think, is going to be very important. Here in the UK, we have an agency called the QAA, the Qualifications and Curriculum Authority, Quality Agency, and they have prepared a very useful guidance on education and sustainable development about how universities can embed sustainable education within their curriculums across the entire nation. And it's very useful because it's based around many of the issues that you've already talked about, notably around the Sustainable Development Goals from the UN, and also about the difference that those can make, not just in terms of curriculum, in terms of input, but also in terms of output and the cognitive processes that students go through. From our perspective as a business school, of course, sustainability is very much a business issue. And it's also a creative issue, which is one of the reasons I think it's important to talk about it within Creative Spark. The solutions that we are going to have to come up with to address what is a genuine and very pressing climate crisis are going to have to be creative solutions, because we're not there yet. And therefore, it's important that the younger people that we are tasked with educating recognize that as part of their education process, because they're going to be bringing those new ideas and those new cognitive processes that the UN have identified into their thinking when they go into industry. And of course, from our perspective, it's about business, and it's about how you try to change people's views about the relationship between business and the environment. And from my perspective in the business school, I don't think those two things are exclusive at all. I think that actually business has a very important part to play in that, and also play it in a very positive way. And therefore, we embed sustainable education across our 4-year degree programs. We're a much smaller university than UCLan. We have about 3,000 students taking our business programs at Queen Margaret. But even so, that's a relatively influential process of educating and changing the minds of those 3,000 potential new business leaders, managers in industry, people who are going out to make choices about how they might process, how they might manage their business, what kind of elements they might include in the production, for example, or how they might treat people, or how they might treat the environment that surrounds their local businesses. One of the core elements of what we teach is something called triple bottom line, which is about giving equity between people, between the sustainable elements, and between profit within the business balance sheet. In essence, we teach them that it's not just about profit, it's also about those two other elements as well. And within the thought-making process, those three elements should have equity. We also try to teach it, as you might imagine, as a business school in a very practical way. So we focus very much on real life situations, the real life choices that businesses are facing, and asking our students to start thinking more creatively about how they will solve those. If I could just finish up rather on the QAA guidance and the importance of it being guidance rather than diktat. I think guidance as a process is very helpful because it allows individual institutions to address their particular curriculum in a flexible way that allows them still to teach as they wish to teach, but within a framework that has been set by government or government agencies in our case. And I think that's a very helpful approach because it still allows the creativity that universities need to have in their teaching, and also that it reflects the wide range of subjects that are taught within higher education. Obviously, I look at it from a business perspective, and other colleagues will look at it from their own disciplines. And having guidance rather than diktat means that that flexibility is there and it's built in, and it means that the institutions themselves and the students benefit from that guidance rather than end up being restricted by it. So that's all I want to say, Jamila.
Thank you very much, Mr. Robertson. I think you have underlined very important the stakeholder involvement, you know, the policymakers, but also businesses. And I would especially focus on businesses because we can see a lot of blame, especially on businesses, you know, that they actually, they don't really care about environment. For them, money is on the first, you know, the profit is important, but they don't care about what is the price paid for this, you know. So, and therefore, I think it's, you raised very important matters that the curriculum of the business schools need to include the sustainability issues, you know. So this is really key aspect. So with this, I would like also, I understand that Mr. Chris Lane has something to add to this discussion. Please, Mr. Lane. I'm right. We can't hear you. Yeah.
Sorry, no. Allow the next speaker, really.
All right. Thank you. Then I think we can go on, and we have another question to our the distinguished the experts and speakers. On actually, the question is how development of new degree programs has been approached, and what are key learning points from that process. And to respond to this, I would like to invite Professor Claire Seaman from Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh. Please, over to you, Professor Seaman.
Thank you very much, everybody. And if I can start by thanking both British Council and all the speakers for helping to organise this event. It is clearly key to our futures. And I would suggest that the young people we teach know that. Sometimes I think they know that in sharper relief than we do. And they press us to answer questions, which John highlighted, and it's a very fair comment. And I have been reflecting because I've had a variety of roles, obviously some research-based roles, but along the way, I've also led the redesign of the undergraduate and master's curricula for our business school at different times. And I've worked very closely to try to bring business into the classroom. And both of these, I think, are key. What I have been trying to reflect on for this case study is to think about the very practical things that have actually helped us to make change happen. Because what we've found along the way is that it's very easy to get to a stage where everybody thinks it's a good idea, but actually making change happen takes both leadership, and it also takes the buy-in of the academic staff who will take the principles and the centrally set government standards for degree programmes and actually turn those into real change in the classroom. And that's no easy task. That's a very big ask for everyone. So along the way, I've been trying to think about what we've done that has helped us as we seek to try and embed sustainability across the business school curriculum. One of the key things is team working. So a number of my predecessors in speaking today have mentioned government standards and they've mentioned academic staff. But working as teams is part of that, and working both within the business school and across faculties. I would suggest technology is an inherent part of some of the solutions. We don't teach technology, but we teach at Queen Margaret specifically, but we do teach many of the ways in which technology is implemented, and finding ways to bridge that divide between those whose role is to develop technological or industrial solutions, and those who manage the processes in a business context has been very important for us. We have set up a university-wide group which works based on the United Nations Sustainability Goals and similar publications, but it works to look across the university at all curriculum. We found that group actually to be very useful in bringing together different approaches in different subjects, but also because when you bring academic teams together in that context, what we found is that all sorts of spin-off benefits occur. People get to know people because they're working on the same group, and it encourages a little bit of cross-faculty working, which has been useful. I also would suggest that the national degree standards guidance that Mark mentioned is very, very important, because it's helped the teams to focus as we go through our 5-yearly curriculum review process. It's helped us to focus on what matters and to bring that to the fore. But I think I would echo John finally in his comments on the importance of getting buy-in from the academic teams. It is partly about how we design degree programs, but it's also about what's said and done in the classroom itself, whether that's about whether your shoes are vegetarian or whether it's about an acceptance that we're all looking for good solutions. But these are complex, wicked problems, which it will take academia and industry and government and the whole population to some extent to find good routes forward for. Students come to us at a very wide range of social development, and I think this is very important. Some come to us ready to speak up about sustainability, and some very definitely come to us thinking they're not quite sure whether they ought to be brave enough to speak. My concern to some extent is that that will translate into what they say and do in their future working lives. So we are also trying very deliberately to design curricula that produces graduates who are not afraid to speak up in the right place, in the right time, in a professional manner, certainly. But we do need people to speak up in the wider world too, and that will influence to what extent the subject is taught at an academic level and to what extent it's ever translated into business, industry, real life, and the outside world. And I'm happy to say more about that, because I think how we design, for example, industry-based projects for our business school students to work with business and to get into the habit of trying to make positive change happen, I think that's vitally important. But I'm going to leave it there because I think I have a number of other speakers to come in perhaps on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Simon, for sharing your views on this important matter. And I think we have so far have discussed, how we can integrate sustainability issues into our curriculum and into our programs. And I think we also need to discuss what else universities can do beyond the curriculum and research. And for this, I would like to invite our next speakers. And I would also ask them, what are the key objectives of university sustainable development and zero carbon print strategies? And how are they achieved? How universities can become greener? And we have a couple of case studies on this, and I'm delighted to invite my colleague from Tashkent State Technical University, Professor Mananov, who would like to share the case study with us. Please, Professor Mananov.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые коллеги. Я очень рад приветствовать всех в этом уникальном виртуальном цифровом пространстве. Спасибо организаторам за такую красивую платформу, где мы можем поговорить о насущных проблемах. Я представляю Ташкентский государственный технический университет, который является одним из старейших вузов. В прошлом году мы праздновали 100-летие нашего университета. Практически технические вузы все в Узбекистане являются выходцами из нашего университета. То есть я представляю то подразделение, которое мы сейчас хотим, так сказать, объединить. Это и рассматриваем факторы интеграции образования и устойчивого развития. Устойчивое развитие не может быть достигнуто исключительно с помощью технологий, политического регулирования или каких-либо финансовых механизмов. Я полностью согласен с нашим уважаемым модератором, что сегодня в высших учебных заведениях недостаточно в учебные планы и учебные программы внести вопросы подготовки специалистов, которые бы хорошо знали вопросы по изменению климата, по биоразнообразию там, и так далее. Сегодня стоит вопрос еще глубже, и сегодня мы должны подготовить наше все человечество, изменить сам образ мышления и поведения. Для этого, опять же, мы в кругу, мы должны обеспечить качественное образование. Наш университет в этом направлении ведет различную работу. Существуют различные взгляды, как на самом деле понятие устойчивого развития и как эту оценку эффективности провести путем альтернативных достижений результатов. Каждая страна располагает собственным запасом природных ресурсов, культурным наследием, нормативно-правовой инфраструктурой, и, следовательно, ее энергетическая стратегия будет непременно связана с собственными приоритетами. Поэтому единую концепцию разработать, которая подходила бы ко всем странам, наверное, очень сложно. Наш университет оценил эти факторы и, например, я с удовольствием, если приедете, мы вам покажем, а сейчас только расскажу, что факультет энергетики у нас полностью крыша закрыта солнечными батареями. И производство электроэнергии достаточно сегодня для того, чтобы обеспечить весь факультет. Планируется, что в ближайшее время, где-то к 2025 году, мы постараемся развить эту систему и на другие факультеты и обеспечить даже излишки на реализацию или передачу в другие организации. Это одна из возможностей использования альтернативных источников энергии. Кроме этого, мы ведем большую работу. В данном случае я благодарен представительству Британского совета, которое в 2017 году как раз пригласило нас для участия в конкурсе по проекту Creative Spark. Я очень рад, что мы выиграли этот проект и несколько лет уже вот ведем это направление. В прошлом году мы участвовали совместно с Лондонским университетом левого берега южного берега по подготовке специалистов, студентов, которые бы могли на студенческих скамьях уже начать свой бизнес. То есть начни свой бизнес, первые шаги в бизнесе, предпринимательская деятельность, параллельно с изучением английского языка. Вот по прошлому году мы очень этим гордимся. Мы стали лауреатами премии «Предпринимательский университет года». И по 3 номинациям «Стартап», награда за «Зеленый университет» и награда за связь с индустрией. Мы сегодня работаем и с нашими работодателями, которые не только участвуют в подготовке учебных планов и программ, но и практически, забирая наших студентов в неделю один раз, практически показывают, как идет работа на предприятиях, с чем они столкнутся после завершения. И именно в реальных условиях смотрят реализацию вопросов устойчивого развития. Еще раз благодарю представительство Британского совета за организацию этой встречи. Спасибо большое.
Благодарю вас, Улугбек Васикович, за то, что вы поделились тем опытом, который накоплен в Ташкентском государственном техническом университете в плане, разработок в области устойчивого развития. Действительно, ТГТУ – это ведущий вуз республики, который готовит высококвалифицированные кадры для многих отраслей нашей промышленности, для индустрии. И это особенно важно, что вот те кадры, которые завтра будут возглавлять, будут работать в промышленном секторе нашей республики, они тоже имеют представление, не только представление, но смогут завтра быть, ну так скажем, чемпионами в области устойчивого развития. Еще раз благодарю вас за ваше выступление. I understand that Mr. Fraser Bart has also the case from the Goldsmiths, which he wants to share with us. Please, Mr. Bart.
Thank you. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I work more on the professional service side of Goldsmiths, and in 2019, as did a lot of universities that year, Goldsmiths declared a climate emergency and set a quite ambitious target to become a carbon neutral university by 2025. And so we have then begun work to move towards that target. And I wanted to share some reflections so far based on the work that we've been delivering. So I think the first one has already been picked up by John in a general sense. And I actually think it's true of any organization, any government really. And it is the not just buying, but the drive from leadership. So our warden, who's essentially our vice chancellor, leads on this work essentially. So that goes an incredibly long way in sort of the speed with which you can seek to implement changes and drive changes. I think that the second reflection I'd have is that you need a set of clear overall aims or targets. And so that was sort of our carbon reduction work, the first step that we took. We analysed all of our non-pay budget and particularly in relation to our scope 3 emissions, identified what was influenceable and what wasn't influenceable, and set a series of targets as well as a series of targets for our scope 1 and 2 emissions, with annual targets taking us towards 2025. So, but then within that, and again, I think it's really positive because a lot of our reflections here in a less curriculum focused way are very similar to what colleagues have reflected on vis-a-vis the curriculum. So underneath those clear set of targets, I think there needs to be a level of flexibility and sort of the space for entrepreneurial approaches to be developed. So, I mean, it seems like an obvious comment, but there's obviously no blueprint of how to do this. Nobody has had to do this before. So it's quite different from any challenge that I think any of us, any organization, any university has faced. And so one way I always describe what we've done at Goldsmiths is we did it in a way that we would never do with any other university project. We set out our plans to be carbon neutral by 2025, and we couldn't tell you how much that was going to cost or where the money was going to come from, which is just not very good practice, but in this circumstance felt necessary. And a part of the reason that felt necessary was because, again, as colleagues have raised, as I've mentioned, we declared a climate emergency because we had pressure from staff and students. So our staff want it, our students want it, and we need to deliver on that. And so actually, comms is a difficult word sometimes in UK higher education, but there's an element of showing progress. And our view is it's much better to show regular progress to our community and to our local communities than to spend 3 years coming up with the best strategy in the world. And then, you've lost 3 years of time and people think what's happening. There isn't time for that in this challenge. So I think that to me is a slightly entrepreneurial approach, but it also created the space for teams that I work with to be quite entrepreneurial and try to identify funding streams when they became available. And this crosses over a bit to policy here, but we are currently installing a low carbon heating network, which will reduce our gas use on our campus by 75% a year. And that should be operational by the late spring. And that's been paid for by government grant. So we were quite well placed because of the way we'd approached this, and we'd come up with a series of targets and begun analysing slightly earlier than other universities. We're the only university to have got a grant from the public sector decarbonisation scheme. And so the final, I think I said I had 4. So the final reflection I'd have from our work on this is a distributed model has worked really well for us. We were sort of everything we do at Goldsmiths is a distributed model because we are smaller. We're much smaller than the likes of a UCL or King's College London. And so it means that we can't set up a team to do everything. So we need to try and work through existing structures, existing budgets, and existing teams. And that actually, I think, works really well for a challenge like decarbonising, because it affects every area of your business. So a distribution model can be very helpful in embedding it more widely. I might just say a couple bits on policy quickly there, if that's okay, and then I will stop speaking. I've obviously mentioned, in terms of outputs from this session, the fact that there is in the UK, a public sector decarbonisation scheme is incredibly helpful because it makes available money to hospitals, hospital trusts, universities, etc. And so I think that's a key learning potentially, I would have thought, and that scheme will be run annually from now for the next few years. So, but equally, I think there needs to be a sector approach, which we've not had yet in the UK. So there's no regulation for us. There's no sort of sector approach, but Universities UK, our sector body, will be publishing a series of policy positions which will commit, but with no repercussions, UK universities to certain standards. And I think that's what's missing right now to get maybe leadership buy-in, which is my first point, more widely across the sector, because right now it's very person specific, and you could see institutional change of leadership changing institutional priorities. But I hope that is in some way helpful.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bart, for sharing your experience. And I think it's quite impressive what Goldsmiths has done, and especially, as you have mentioned, with limited resources. So I think it's a good example how you can, even with limited resources, but I think what is important is a commitment of different stakeholders in university to promote these carbon neutral policies and practices, what is even more important. So thank you very much for sharing this. And I now would move on. I think we have discussed a number of important matters, including the integration of the sustainability matters into curriculum, how universities can do, the premises greener to reduce the carbon print, but now we have started this discussion already, but I would like now to go into a little bit more details, how actually higher education institutions and businesses can work together to achieve sustainable development objectives. And for this, I would like to invite Ms. Kate Tetley from People First International, who would like to share their experience. So please, Ms. Tetley.
Thank you. So for us, it's the business voice in all of this is important as well. And I understand that you are all working closely with industry. And I think it's finding ways that you can all work together in order to meet these commitments. And a number of people have raised similar areas. They've raised areas around the communication, around the community itself, around confidence. And I think we would say from an industry point of view, it's seeing where the higher education agenda sits within the business community. So you are part of that community, and how you engage and integrate those themes alongside business is really important. And there's a number of ways of doing that. Some people have already raised where they have got the curriculum content, for example, being done with industry, but there's also areas around how you're assessing students, how you're delivering the curriculum, the quality assurance of that, and how those new ideas and innovations that students are coming up with are actually also helping industry and taking all of that community along with them. You've mentioned the leadership within higher education, for example, but you also need that leadership in industry, you know, and there's some capacity building issues that need to be addressed there. And you could go back to a comment that Kamal John made earlier, which is let's just blame industry for not having done it. But I think we all have a responsibility to see this as part of a community issue. I was also interested in how many people have mentioned about the actual confidence of the young people themselves as well, and where the higher education is doing a fantastic job imparting this knowledge and everything to these young people, but actually confidence also requires them to understand a bit more about the business world and how they're going to apply that, and as Claire said, how they are going to get that message out once they're in work, and that ability to put forward their own ideas of innovation. So I think it is a partnership. You know, the higher education sector and business need to be working together on this. And there are, again, standards that could be followed, quality standards in education that could be followed to aid that. And I think that's a policy consideration for the government as to how you might standardize some of that as well. So the other point I would like to make, I realize that time is short here. So the final point I'd like to make is not just looking at higher education in terms of just the students there. I think for business, it's also really important that you can access higher education at any point through your career as well. So the idea of lifelong learning should be that there are multiple entry and exit points from education into industry, into different areas, into different levels, into different modules. And I think that we are looking very much here at a system which could also reskill existing workforces and enable them to pivot into new economic areas. So you need growth in Uzbekistan. In every country, we need growth of businesses and we need growth of ideas. And those we have seen moving much, much more quickly over the last year and a half. Everything's kind of speeded up and we need better solutions more quickly. So I think one of the things for Uzbekistan and higher education to look at is how you can get these lifelong learning, continual professional development processes out into industry, communicating with industry and articulating why those are of such huge benefit to industry, country, young people, old people, disabled people, you know, whatever. We all need that in terms of our career progression. So that would be, and that would be the points that I would make here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your views and bringing industry perspective. And just to continue on this, you know, to bring the business perspective into our discussion, I would like to invite Ms. Lola Saifi, who is the founder of the Human House Gallery, which is quite well known in Tashkent and in Uzbekistan. So, Ms. Saifi, please, over to you.
Всем добрый день. Сейчас Всем добрый день. Я надеюсь, меня слышно?
Да, мы слышим вас, пожалуйста.
Потише сделать. Не шумит. Я, во-первых, тоже хочу поблагодарить British Council за то, что подняли такую важную тему, на самом деле для всех важную, не только для креативных предпринимателей и студентов. Мы вчера обсуждали о том, что это касается, в принципе, каждого человека на Земле. И я со своей стороны могу сказать, со стороны своего 20-летнего практического опыта. Я послушала, как много преподавателей, профессоров говорили о том, что они считают. Я могу поговорить о том, могу сказать, что я думаю на эту тему и чем хорошо креативное предпринимательство, чем хороши ремесленники и дизайнеры в сохранении климата. Я давно думаю на эту тему, действительно, и мы сейчас все сталкиваемся с большим количеством нехватки воды в Узбекистане. Это действительно большая проблема для многих, особенно если это касается регионов. Вот буквально лето нам это показало. И я вчера и сегодня обсуждала эту тему со знакомыми геологами, экологами, и они мне сказали о том, что большие производства и большая крупная промышленность, она, конечно, потребляет очень большое количество электроэнергии, воды. И в этом отношении, если мы будем развивать мелкий бизнес, мелкое производство, ремесленничество, дизайнерство и так далее, мы не будем производить перепроизводство одежды. Наверняка все видели огромные свалки одежды или предметов быта. Мы будем производить одежду или какие-то предметы, которыми будут пользоваться люди много-много лет. К примеру, нашей одеждой люди пользуются по 10-20 лет, и я сама удивляюсь, насколько наша одежда живучая. Ремесленники используют натуральные ткани, используют натуральные красители. Это тоже и в сравнении с крупными производствами, конечно, мы не потребляем такое большое количество воды, большое количество электроэнергии. И, конечно, если мы будем в дальнейшем развивать мелкий бизнес и креативное предпринимательство во всех направлениях, это будет влиять действительно на climate change. Мы будем сохранять большое количество ресурсов. Поэтому мы со своей стороны можем здесь, как практики, например, для, может быть, ташкентских или узбекистанских вузов, а может быть, даже и зарубежных вузов, принимать студентов на практику для того, чтобы делиться своим опытом здесь. Вот примерно так. И еще раз хочу сказать большое спасибо за то, что поднимаете такую тему. Очень приятно было послушать преподавателей. Мы со своей стороны готовы всячески в дальнейшем развивать и сотрудничать в этой теме тоже.
Мы также благодарим вас за высказанные, мнения. Действительно, сегодня, к сожалению, не так много мы видим, представителей бизнес-среды, которые ответственно относятся к общественным проблемам, в том числе к вопросам защиты окружающей среды. Поэтому нам очень ценен ваш личный опыт в этом плане. Спасибо вам большое. Yes, and dear colleagues, I think we have heard from industry and business perspectives on this matter, but I would like now to invite the university perspective. And again, we have Professor Claire Seaman from Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh, who would like to contribute to this, I understand. Please, Professor Seaman.
Hello again, everybody. Thank you very, very much indeed. I think some of what I was planning to say has already been said by my colleagues, because it was really around emphasizing the importance of working with business in everything we do. Estimates vary, because estimates always vary, but a very small number of global companies in many ways are responsible for a huge percentage of our carbon emissions. working with them is absolutely key. And that perhaps is my final comment on this, because how we work with businesses today and how we work with businesses to make positive change happen in many ways defines whether we teach our students how things should be improved, or whether we teach them how things can be improved in the future. And I think that's really the only thing that I have to add. Much else has been said by colleagues and said well, and thank you all very much for your contributions. It's been a fascinating morning.
Thank you very much, Professor Simon. And I'm afraid I'm not a good timekeeper, and we're a little bit behind our schedule. So I would like to move on fast a little bit. And I would like now to invite our colleagues to reflect on the policy level support to building effective ecosystems. And the question is actually, what can and needs to be done at a policy level to support and build effective ecosystems? And for this, I would like to invite the member of Uzbek Parliament, Ms. Dilorom Fayzieva, to contribute to our discussion. Dilorom Снудиновна, пожалуйста, мы приглашаем вас высказать свое мнение.
Assalomu alaykum. Eshitilyapti. Muhtaram, bugungi mana shunday bir foydali vebinarimiz ishtirokchilari, hurmatli raislik etuvchi va hurmatli elchi janoblari, bu juda ham darhaqiqat o'ta dolzarb bugungi kunda muhokama deb hisoblayman. Negaki bizni parlamentimizni agar misol qilib keltirsak, barqaror rivojlanish maqsadlariga erishish borasida parlamentni ham ma'lumki o'zini funksiyalari bor, o'zini vazifalari bor. Bu vazifalarni biz bajarishga mana harakat qilyapmiz anchadan beri va bunda alohida bir parlament komissiyasi o'zini ishini olib boradi va bundan tashqari barcha bizni agar qonunchilik palatasini misol qilib keltirsak, 12 ta qo'mitamiz barcha mana shu berilgan 17 ta maqsadlar bo'yicha o'zini nazorat ishlarini olib boradi. Va bugungi agar bizni bugungi mavzuga bir ahamiyat bersak, demak bu yerda yashil iqtisodiyotga o'tish masalalari, bu iqlim o'zgarishini demak oldini olishga qaratilgan, unga moslashishga qaratilgan qanday ishlar olib borilishi kerak. Albatta barcha 17 ta maqsad o'zaro bog'liq. Buni yuqorida aytib o'tishdi, men qaytarilishni istamasdim. Faqat bir ayrim joylarda ta'kidlamoqchi edim ayrim masalalarni va parlament tomonidan nima ishlar qilinishi mumkin, aynan shu maqbul muhit yaratish uchun mana shu bugungi biz muhokama qilayotgan ishlarni samarali olib borilishi uchun degan bir masala turibdi. Demak, men aytishim kerak, bugun sifatli ta'lim masalasiga biz alohida e'tibor beryapmiz. Va bu yerda sheriklik, hamkorlik masalalari turibdi. Albatta, birinchi navbatda barcha shu maqsadlarga erishish, barcha bugungi kunda biz qo'ygan mavzulardagi asosiy bir asos deb hisoblayman. Bu birinchi navbatda ta'lim sifatiga bog'liq barchasi. Chunki mutaxassislar salohiyati birinchi navbatda ta'lim sifatiga bog'liq. Nafaqat mutaxassislar salohiyati, balki mana aholi to'g'risida gapiryapmiz. Aholini bu masalalarni qabul qilishi, to'g'ri tushunishi va keyingi harakatlarni olib borishi, albatta bu hammasi ta'lim sifatiga bog'liq. Va men yuqorida professor Mark Robertsonning so'zlariga juda ham qo'shilgan ravishda shuni aytmoqchimanki, darhaqiqat resurslardan oqilona foydalanish va yuqori samaraga erishish vazifasi turibdi. Bu biznesda tenglik, muvozanat to'g'risida gapirildi. Bu demak nafaqat iqtisodiy foyda olish, balki ham ijtimoiy mas'uliyatga ega bo'lish, ekologik mas'uliyatga ega bo'lish. Men yuqorida bizni Sayfiyeva bizni biznes vakillarimiz mana shu gaplarni aytib o'tdilar. Endi biz Qonunchilik palatasi bu masalada qanday ishlarni olib borishimiz kerak? Nima bilan biz ko'mak berishimiz mumkin? Avvalambor bu bizni Oliy ta'lim vazirligi bilan o'zaro hamkorligimiz. Bu bizni xorijiy markazlar bilan o'zaro hamkorligimiz. Demak, Britaniya kengashi bilan mana shunday hamkorlikda ko'pgina anjumanlarda ko'ryapmiz, ko'pgina ishlarni birga amalga oshiryapmiz, o'sha boshida turibmiz-ku. Lekin mana shu hamkorlikni qanday biz olib borishimiz kerakki, bugun bizni oldimizga qo'yilgan mana shu kreativ industriyani yaratish. Endi bu bizda ham mavjud, lekin shuni rivojlantirish uchun biz nima qilishimiz kerak degan masala turibdi. Va albatta ko'rinib turibdi, mana barcha Buyuk Britaniyani universitetlari bilan o'zaro hamkorlikni olib borish masalalari. Bizda fan va ta'lim, madaniyat masalalari qo'mitasi bor. O'ylaymizki, shu qo'mita bilan o'zaro hamkorlikda biz shu ishlarga parlament tomonidan qanday ko'mak kerak bo'lsa, mana shuni amalga oshirishga biz tayyormiz. Har doim qo'llab-quvvatlashga tayyormiz va o'ylaymizki, bunda birinchi navbatda biz Oliy ta'lim vazirligi bilan va barcha mana shu masalada mutasaddi bo'lgan tashkilotlar bilan birgalikda ishlarni olib borishimiz kerak va mumkin. Bunda birinchi navbatda mana shu bo'layotgan dasturlardan muntazam ravishda bizni xabardor bo'lishimiz juda muhim ahamiyatga ega. Menimcha bu bo'yicha biz muntazam aloqalarni o'rnatishimiz kerak. Hurmatli Komiljon aka, shunaqa deb o'ylayman. Va monitoring olib borish. Parlamentni nazorat funksiyasi bor va nazorat funksiyasi doirasida shu muntazam ravishda monitoring olib borish. Mana bugun biz oldik shunday bir ma'lumotlarni. Kelgusida bugungi mana shu tashabbusdan kelib chiqqan holda kelgusida qanday ishlar olib boriladi? Biz xohlardikki, bu borada demak, soha rivoji uchun nafaqat huquqiy asoslar yaratilishi ko'zda tutiladi, balki o'zaro hamkorlikda mana shu tajriba almashinuv loyihalarini amalga oshirish lozim deb hisoblaymiz. Bu loyihalarni albatta Oliy ta'lim vazirligi muvofiqlashtirgan holda bizni demak universitetlarimiz tomonidan, oliy ta'lim maskanlarimiz tomonidan olib boriladi. Va bu amaliy harakatlarni tashkil qilinishi, ularni samarali olib borilishi va undan kutilgan natijalarga erishishda esa bizni parlamentning ham roli bor. Va o'ylaymizki, biz aynan shu monitoring orqali shu bizni maqsadlarimiz bor, barqaror rivojlanish maqsadlariga erishishda ko'rinib turibdiki, biz olib borayotgan shu kungacha faoliyat bu bir ayrim shu maqsadlarga qanday erishish borasidagi milliy indikatorlarga baho berish bilan biz cheklanganmiz. Ko'rinib turibdiki, yo'q, bu yerda juda ham keng qamrovli ishlar turgan ekan. Bu yerda ham biznes sohasi, ham oliy ta'lim, ham ta'lim tizimini o'ziga yarasha olib borayotgan ishlarni biz amaliy ishlariga ham baho bergan holda ularni targ'ib qilish, ularni keng kelgusida bizni milliy miqyosda qo'llanilishiga yo'l ochib berishga tegishli bo'lgan asoslarni yaratish bu parlamentni vazifasi va bundan kelib chiqqan holda o'ylaymizki, barcha o'sha tegishli bo'lgan kelgusida kerakli normativ huquqiy hujjatlarni Oliy ta'lim vazirligi tomonidan ishlab chiqiladi albatta. Va ularni shu joylarda qanchalik ta'sirga ega bo'layotgani bu baholash parlamentning vazifasi va albatta Oliy ta'lim vazirligi agar qandaydir bir muammolar vujudga kelsa, mana shu hamkorlikda qandaydir bir muammolar vujudga kelgan holda albatta parlament o'z so'zini aytadi degan bir fikrdamiz va shu bilan qisqa vaqtimizni, ko'p vaqtingizni olishni xohlamasdim. Vaqtimiz qisqa va kelgusida o'ylaymanki biz amaliy bir harakatlar bilan bir natijalar bilan bugungi qo'yilgan maqsadlarga erishamiz degan fikrdaman. Barchangizga e'tiboringiz uchun tashakkur va ayniqsa Britaniya kengashiga va Britaniya elchixonasiga mana shu ishlarni boshida turishgani uchun men butun shu deputatlar nomidan rahmat aytmoqchi edim. E'tiboringiz uchun katta rahmat.
Sizga ham katta rahmat Dilara Husnuddinovna bildirgan fikrlar uchun. Muhim vazifalarni mana siz o'z nutqingizda ko'tardingiz. Albatta mana ayniqsa hamkorlik nuqtai nazaridan shu Oliy va o'rta maxsus ta'lim vazirligi hamda Respublikamiz Oliy Majlisi shu quyi palatasi bilan birgalikda qilinadigan ishlar to'g'risida gapirdingiz. Haqiqatdan ham albatta respublikamizda mana bizning milliy barqaror rivojlanish maqsadlari qabul qilingan. O'tdingiz bu yerda milliy indikatorlar ham qabul qilingan, lekin bular bilan faqatgina cheklanmasdan mana hozir biz juda shu Britaniya universitetlar misolida judayam ko'p o'zimizga deylik tatbiq qilishimiz mumkin bo'lgan ijobiy bir yaxshi misollarni eshitdik. Va albatta mana biz ham Toshkent davlat texnika universiteti misolida ham ko'rishimiz mumkin. Boshqa universitetlarda bunday harakatlar bor, lekin albatta biz xohlagandek bir darajada emas. Bir qandaydir milliy harakat barcha shu universitetlarimizga buni bugungi kunda bu ishlar amalga oshirilyapti deyish menimcha hali erta. Lekin biz ko'ryapmiz, mana biz bitta misol mana shu iqlim o'zgarishi, ekologiya bilan bog'liq masalalar albatta bizni ham bu respublikamizni chetlab o'tmaydi. Bu tabiiy hol, bu global muammo. Shuning uchun biz uchun ham albatta bu masalalar dolzarb. Lekin buni albatta hukumat tomonidan deylik shu tegishli vazirlik, idoralar tomonidan harakatlar qilinadi. Lekin buni uzoq muddatli bu masalalarni hal qilish uchun albatta biz shu ta'lim tizimida, shu jumladan oliy ta'lim tizimida ham albatta bu masalalarni jiddiyroq qo'yishimiz kerak va mana xuddi Britaniya universiteti yoki boshqa dunyoning universitetlari kabi albatta bizning o'quv dasturlarimizga, o'quv rejalarimizga shu barqaror rivojlanish masalasini ham, iqlim o'zgarish, ekologiya masalalari, boshqa masalalarni albatta biz o'quv dasturlarimizga kiritishimiz kerak. Lekin bu bilan ham cheklanmasdan mana hozir yaxshi misollar eshitdik. Deylik tadqiqot nuqtai nazaridan, ilm fan nuqtai nazaridan, chunki bu yerda ham juda katta salohiyat mavjud, bularni ham albatta ishga solishimiz kerak. Va uchinchi muhim qismi biz ko'ryapmiz, mana o'sha universitetlarni o'zi deylik, nafaqat o'qitish, balkim o'sha yerdagi sharoitlarni ham mana shu deylik o'sha ekologiyaga mos ravishda, o'sha standartlarga mos ravishda deylik tashkil qilish ishlari. O'sha deylik u yerdagi resurslarni tejash nuqtai nazaridan yoki mana muqobil energiyani ishlatish nuqtai nazaridan va hokazo hokazo. Mana biz o'sha yana qaytaraman, Toshkent davlat texnika universitetidagi yaxshi deylik misollar bor. Buni biz albatta kengroq universitetlarimizga deylik buni yoyishimiz kerak, bu yaxshi misollarni. Dear colleagues, with this, I think we had very interesting, very stimulating, very focused discussion around the matters related to sustainable development. We have heard different perspectives, university perspectives, business perspectives, policymaker perspectives. So I think it was a very stimulating overall discussion. So from my point of view, I think I have done my role here, and we had a Q&A planned, but I'm afraid we don't have much time now for this, but I'm sure we will continue this interesting discussion. And just to wrap up our today's the webinar, I would like to hand over to Jamila again. So thank you very much once again to all our speakers, to all our guests, to all our the audience for their patience, for their brilliant views and questions. So thank you once again. Over to you, Jamila.
Thank you very much, Camille John. This has been really, really interesting discussion. And thanks to all panel members for excellent contributions to that. As you can see, we have prepared for this discussion. We really thought carefully about each question and how they can lead us to some concrete action. And you have already summarized this, Camille John Hamidovich. For me, just to say, as all colleagues said, it's complex. It's key to our futures. It's systemic. It's about values. It's about leadership. It's about relationships and buy-in. It's about strategies, but also about very concrete steps that people and organizations and nations need to take. And this is just the beginning of our conversation. And as part of our Creative Spark program, we will be looking at how we, learning from this good practice and excellent examples and case studies, we can change our project and shape our project so the project becomes more sustainable and we encourage sustainability for the future. So, and of course, we will be sharing with you the summary of action points. We will also be sending you some interesting links to some research work that the British Council has done in the area of climate change, working with young people and researchers worldwide. Also very useful points about professional development and how we can work with El Yurtumide Foundation and how we promote opportunities to study in the UK among UK and Uzbek institutions. So there is a lot, but thank you so much for this discussion. This discussion has been recorded and we have got, I think, all your permissions to share this with project networks, because that will be the basis for our discussions. And of course, as very committed partners, the Ministry of Higher and Secondary Specialized Education and the British Council will discuss how we take all these ideas forward. And of course, thank you very much, Florin Husnudinova, for your excellent suggestions on how we can support all these changes through legislation, through international partnerships, and collaborations, because there is a lot we can do. We can do at a national level, but at a personal level, I think, each of us. So thank you very much, all of you, for this fantastic discussion, and see you very soon.